morning. Welcome to Environmental Issue webinar for Level 3 AgHort Science. I'd just like to introduce Lauren Roberts. Lauren Roberts is an educator with Lincoln University, specialising in things that can be passed on to students around the country. So Lauren was a previous AgHort teacher and has now moved into this role to try and break down the barriers between tertiary education and secondary and be able to use great resources that Lincoln University has got and provide those for teachers and students. So I hope you enjoy the webinar. If you have any questions or queries, please write them in the chat. And if they need to be answered immediately, I will stop Lauren and get them answered. If they are can be waited till later, I will get them answered at the end of the webinar. All right, so welcome, Lauren.
Awesome. So kia ora, thanks, Kerry. And I might also lean on you a little bit as well. I'm sure between the two of us, we'll be able to answer all the questions. And if not, then I will go to lecturers and I'll go knocking on their doors and asking for answers. So, yeah, feel free to ask questions. I'll just quickly share my screen. And we will go. Go that one. There we go. 1 second. Awesome. All right. So hopefully that's showing up really well on the screen. So like I said, Lauren Roberts, and we're going to look at some of those environmental issues, mostly focusing on nitrogen leaching and dairy farming. So what has caused this environmental focus? Are people aware of it? Very much so. It's been in the headlines quite a bit. It is stopping people from actually going swimming in our waterways, which has led to the Swimmable Rivers policy. The whole water could not actually be drinkable. There's been some sort of talk about that. About 40 deaths per year has actually been estimated to be due to nitrogen leaching and those higher concentrations. And the big focus has actually been the increase, of course, in dairy cattle and intensification. So there is a lot of grumblings, and it is a bit of a problem. It is quite a big problem, actually. So we've done a bit of research around it, and I hope I can go through some of the research and the science to kind of explain how this issue is unfolding. So let's go into it. Why is it such a problem? Bit of a summary. What we're really concerned about is eutrophication. Essentially what happens is it tends to happen around summer. There is excess nitrogen in the waterways. Now remember, nitrogen is not actually, we don't really use good or bad, it's just that it's an excess. So nitrogen does help things grow, and what's happening is it goes into the waterways, there's a lot of plant growth, that's sucking up oxygen from the water, and then after a while it actually starts breaking down. As things decompose, they also suck up more oxygen, and what ends up happening is that we get a lack of oxygen in our waterways, and that can sort of destroy the ecosystems. What can also happen is that you can get a different type of algae, which is blue-green algae. There's a really good example just to the side. I'm using something local, which is Lake Ellesmere, and that says got blue-green algae. You can even save it from space. Not ideal. Sometimes it can get into the point of sort of neurotoxins, or you get these no-swim signs, and a few dogs can die and things like that. So obviously not very healthy, not something that we want. So let's see if we can help sort it. So just as like a little bit of a wider scope, it's important to realise that in terms of nitrogen leaching, dairy is not the biggest actually vegetables and mixed cropping is, just because of their practices and how much they apply. But the thing about dairy and why it's been such a big focus is that it takes up and is on a lot of land. So it's how big the industry is that is actually leading to these nitrogen leaching and why it's been such a big focus. But if you think about our vegetable growers, they tend to be smaller operations. So even though they leach more, there's just not as many of them. So if we have a look at sort of the total nitrogen leaching, that's a really, really cool sort of graph. What you'll see is the correlation. All those areas in red tend to be where there are sort of dairy areas that are known for it. So you've kind of got Invercargill, Canterbury, Taranaki, Waikato. So the correlation is definitely there. Generally speaking, they're saying, look, our monitored rivers, we're getting 55% worse. So there's a very, very high correlation, essentially. We know it's dairy. So what's the government wanting to do about it? Look, they came along with our freshwater reforms. They said, look, you're only allowed to use 190 kgs of synthetic nitrogen. That does not apply to fertilizer growers. Vegetable growers. There's a $7 million fund to create jobs and riparian in wetlands. So they're trying to sort of do the waterways and fence those off. And also farmers are going to have to report how much nitrogen they are applying to the council, and there's also going to be sales records from our fertilizer companies as well. So that's sort of like the national-wide soil policy. Then that has to work together with your regional policies. So here in Canterbury, we will have to reduce our nitrogen leaching by 30% by 2023. So it is a bit of a challenge, but we're definitely on track to actually do that. So in terms of the policy, there was a little bit of like, is this enough? Is this not enough? People are at the moment thinking it's not enough. And what we'll do is that we'll go through the actual process of nitrogen leaching and we'll figure out if this will actually help the problem. So the big thing is that in terms of our nitrogen sources, urea fertilizer is actually applied at 30 kgs of nitrogen per hectare, and those policies are focusing on the fertilizer. But in actual fact, most of our nitrogen leaching is coming from urine patches, aka cowpea. So that's a really, really good example there. It's at 700 kgs of nitrogen per hectare, so substantial. Key ideas about nitrogen, just hopefully this is going back into the past where you're like, yeah, I love my soils, and you've got down. Remember, we do need nitrogen in that root zone, so then we do get growth and we can feed our animals and get production. So just keep that as note. And usually it's dissolved in the water, so it's held in the water. So let's go into the nitrogen cycles. Where do you get nitrogen? You've got organic matter, so that can be things like even applying effluent. Remember that is apply organic matter as well, or dead plants coming through. And then also we've got our fertilizer, so that's our synthetic, our natural, which is, like I was saying, effluent, and bacteria. So when I'm talking about legumes, generally speaking, in dairy pastures, it has been a ryegrass clover mix. And of course, our clover is our legume, which is fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere into the soil. So that actually puts it into ammonium, and we really like that form. That's really, really good. You'll see a little positive there. And then what happens is that that's actually useful growth. So that's our green self-growth that we really like, and those little root fibers. Then we come into this soil side. So it goes from ammonium, which is positive, and then we've got little bacteria that likes it. So they're eating away at it and converting it over into our nitrates, which is negative. The thing to remember is that soil is negative. So when you've got soil that's negative and nitrates that are negative, when it rains, it's quite easily released through the soil profile. Well, it's an ammonium, it's actually a positive, so it's adhering within that soil structure a little bit more, so it actually stays there. Just note, only both types of bacteria can be in the presence of oxygen, and of course we do want oxygen because it helps our plants grow. And like I was saying, the negative charge does not adhere well to negative soil particles, so you can get leaching. A few notes though is that if in terms of organic matter is actually positively charged, so you can reduce some soil leaching by actually increasing the organic matter within your soil. Will that solve all of it? No, but it does help. Cool, so that's the nitrogen cycle. Hopefully you guys know that. So let's go back to our urine, where they are putting on sort of 700 kgs of nitrogen. And what we've got over to the side is that we've got a little plant, and it's hitting that small area, and the plant goes, look, I can only absorb so much, I'm full, I'm happy, and then it will leave all the rest. Now, you can kind of see with the urine patches how that's working. That's such a concentrated area in there that will become important later on. In terms of your plant species, look, if your plant has a very shallow root system, then of course it can only access that nitrogen for a smaller period of time compared to a plant that has a longer root system. Will be able to access that nitrogen a little bit longer. It's got greater reach, essentially. Cool. So essentially what that policy was saying, yes, plant up all the riparian plantings. Oh, sorry. Yep. Let's do the riparian plantings and that sort of side. And look, that is important. That is part of sort of cleaning up our waterways. It's beneficial to the waterways, definitely. But the thing is to remember that nitrogen leaching does actually leach vertically through the soil. And depending on your soil type, it can take quite a while for it to actually leach through the soil profile and get into the waterways. So you might make changes, and it could say take 20 odd years for it to actually, those changes to flow through the system. So what do? Do we just put nappies on cows? probably not a solution or a practical solution. So we should probably focus a little bit more on different options. So when I'm going to talk about these options, I'm going to be talking about in reference to the Lincoln University farms. We've got 3 Lincoln University farms. We've got a research dairy farm, which is quite small. Then if things go well, it either gets scaled up to our Ashley Dean, which is ADRDS. And then if all things go well, what we do is that we actually apply it to our commercial farm, which is the Lincoln University Dairy Farm, which is in top 2% of profitability. So the research does get scaled up to actually see if we can apply it within a commercial system. So this is the research that has been coming through. In terms of our commercial dairy farm, look, they're wanting to actually be profitable while minimising our farm's environmental footprint. So just quickly in terms of nitrogen management, I'll be going through all of this: riparian planting, pasture, stock management, effluent, time of year and irrigation. But I'll be focusing on sort of the top 4 more so. So riparian planting, definitely something that we did. It's looking really, really nice. Not quite sort of hitting our nitrogen targets of 30% reduction though. So let's go into the relevant parts. We're going to be focusing on, legumes. Oh, actually, we'll focus on ammonium and nitrates. So this little conversion through the bacteria. So we did actually come up with a bit of solution, and it was an inhibitor. So it just slows down the process of changing ammonium into the nitrites and the nitrates, and therefore reducing nitrogen leaching. This was very, very successful. However, it's not actually commercially viable at the moment because there were small amounts of residuals found in milk. And because there are no specifications within trade agreements at the moment, that means that it's not being able to be applied. There's a little bit of talk about actually trying to work that through on the policy side. So it does work, but those residuals are not actually acceptable at the moment within our trade standards. And that's just because they're not mentioned, really. And then this is where our other really big one has come through, which is plantain. So that's focusing more on the legume side. Like if the legumes are converting a lot of nitrogen from the atmosphere and putting it into the soil, how about we reduce the number of legumes? So this is actually doing mixed pastures. And the alternative forage is plantain. Now, plantain is actually a herb. You can go out, you can eat it. It's mentioned in Romeo and Juliet, so it's been around for quite a while. But it's a pretty cool plant for a few different reasons. So what we've done is that in terms of the research, you've got a cow over to the side. It's got a bit of a Fitbit. It's got a heartbeat monitor. We've also got things called lysimeters underneath the soil. So what we're doing is that whatever happens on top, we're capturing the water underneath to actually know how much nitrogen leachate is happening. So every single time that we change something, we can actually directly measure the change in output in nitrogen leaching. So what we did is that we did actually do plantain. As I said, plantain is really cool for a few different reasons. So one is that it's got a slightly higher percentage of water compared to your other pasture species, which of course means that it's diluting the amount of nitrogen within that urine. So that's a positive. The other one is that it's a diuretic. So it means that they need to wee more often. So what's happening is that instead of the cow weeing in one spot a large amount with high concentrations, it's going to be weeing in smaller amounts more often across the paddock in smaller concentrations. And because you're spreading that over more plants, that means more plants have access to that nitrogen and the ability to take it up. So they won't get as full as often, essentially. So that was really, really good. We've got like a little example of taking a spot test, which is measuring the concentrations. and essentially you just have to rub underneath the vulva and she'll give you a little spot test. So that's for concentrations. How do we measure quantity? So that's a little spot test. Fun times. Quantity is also important. So this is essentially attached to the cow, and it will measure how much liquid there is. Look, that was quite expensive, so we had to do a little bit of creative thinking, and we actually made up our own. So it's just like a little seal, essentially, and when it comes off, it's kind of like giving a cow a bikini wax. But it was very, very successful in terms of allowing us to measure the quantities. So this is really another good sort of visual. You can kind of see with the side that was ryegrass clover, you can see how it's quite dark, and there's a small amount versus the other picture, which is our mixed pastures, so the involvement of plantain. So how much did we get? A 58% reduction in nitrogen leaching just with the involvement of plantain, which is awesome because we need a 30% reduction. There is a few problems though in terms of our plantain. One is that it seems to only last in our paddocks for about 2 years. And the key thing is that we need to have plantain at least 30% within your pasture species. So if it's not within 30%, then you're not going to get those reductions. And because it's being outcompeted, it's not persisting. The other side is on a very similar life cycle as dock. So what farmers are noticing is that they put plantain in, and then after about 2 years, they're not really getting the plantain, but they're starting to get a bit of an invasion of dock species. So it's just trying to work out a little bit more of that management side. I think chicory is also showing some really positive results as well. So the other thing that you can also look at in terms of your pasture species is actually your ryegrass. So if we have a look, especially down south, it gets quite cold. And most of your nitrogen leaching actually happens over winter because plants aren't growing, they're not taking up that nitrogen. And also it's wetter, so you're getting more nitrogen actually leaching through the soil profile, being carried down. So what we did is that we actually used Italian ryegrass. And Italian ryegrass has the added benefit of actually growing in winter. So it's not like massive growth, but it's actually still being able to grow in those colder temperatures. And that resulted in sort of comparing which pastures you do up to 54% loss compared to fuchsia or 25% loss. So actually by mixing up your species and the types and actually making them suit your environment, you can have some really good results. So one last slide is just because I just need to remind myself, you can kind of see a little bit in terms of the root zone. So plantain does actually have a reasonable root zone as well. So of course it can suck up that nitrogen a little bit longer. So pasture summary. Italian ryegrass grows in winter, so it can absorb nutrients. Perennial ryegrass goes dormant, so there's more leaching. Plantain is a diuretic and contains more water. This causes cows to urinate more frequently with lower nitrogen concentrations. Clover takes nitrogen from the air and holds it. With more diversity in the pasture, there's less clover, which means there's less nitrogen entering the system. And nitrogen has a negative charge. Organic matter and clay has a positive charge. By increasing the amount of organic matter, you can decrease the amount of leaching. So that's kind of for the pasture side. The other sort of things to take into account, as I said, is that winter is where a lot of the leaching actually happens. So seasonal pasture species, often down south, we do use crops to actually feed our cows. So essentially the cow is taking up all those crops that's in there, potentially, the soil is soft, potentially pugging it up, and it's urinating on that soil. So what you can do is that you can actually use things like catch crops. Hopefully this is somewhat familiar, such as oats. Oats can grow in cool environments, so they can suck up that nitrogen. And the other one that is a little bit more controversial if you don't understand dairying systems is standing pads. So we don't really want the cows on the pasture at winter. There's higher likelihood of sort of pugging and pasture destruction. And once again, if they're urinating and there's no grass growth, then that nitrogen is just going through the soil. So what you can do is that you can put them on a standing pad. And just note that standing pads and feed pads are different. So your feed pad does tend to be concrete, and it's really for the purpose of feeding out food. Now, if anyone has ever worked a job in, say, like a cafe or hospitality, and you've been on concrete floors, I know I have, and by the end of the day, my knees were really, really sore by standing on those concrete floors. So it's just the same for cows, is that that's not necessarily the best for our cows. So standing pads you can actually use, and there's been research on our side into different materials. And with varying results, to be honest. So if you do want to have a little bit more of a dive in, I just go standing pads link in and you can find the results. But essentially, the one that was the best in terms of cleanliness, cleanliness, cost affordability, the cows didn't like at all. So we couldn't really suggest that one going forward into the industry. So we're doing more research around it to figure out what is the ideal. Look, standing pads are a little bit better than, say, laneways or sacrificial paddocks. Essentially, you are capturing the effluent. So once again, that's not going straight into the soil and leaching through. However, it does mean you have to manage higher amounts of effluent. People don't necessarily really like it because they kind of look at the cows in a small area and they go, look, they're not being able to access food, you're depriving your cows. So there is a bit of a public perception issue around standing pads. Laneways work, but of course it's harder on your laneways, and you have to think about, where cows are peeing and pooing. And some farmers still use sacrificial paddocks, which, standing pads are really expensive. So I can also understand that one, but you'll definitely have higher levels of nitrogen leaching, which may not necessarily be where things are going in the future. So something to consider. Would recommend going and looking at the Dairy NZ booklet about standing pads, which is pretty good. So I've stolen that one off that. Positives and negatives. In terms of stock management, look, on our Lincoln University Dairy Farm, we did actually reduce our numbers from 650 cows to 550 cows, which is a bit of a step. Most people will be like, what are you doing? The reality is that if you've got less cows, you've got less nitrogen leaching. So we did get a 3% drop in profit, but saying that, we also had a reduction in costs. Every single cow does have running costs. That could be things to do with health or reproduction, or even just handling the fact that they're in the shed and you need that person a little bit of extra time and they're running of the plant. The good news was that there was more food and pasture for cows. So, we are got really good breeding values, and we are breeding cows to produce large volumes of milk. But if you don't provide them with the food to actually reach their breeding, it's not really worth it. So, yeah, they've definitely been really good on that side. They've got more food. They have been less stress, not having to compete for food. We do send them off farm, but that could be changing in the future. And tracking cows just to actually see what they're doing and why they're doing it. So, yeah, a reduction in cow numbers can definitely work. Probably the one downside that we're having to sort out is we've almost got too much grass growth for the number of cows in sort of spring. So we're having to mow quite a bit. So we need to figure out, sort of iron out the system a little bit more. But in terms of nitrogen leaching, which is a really, really big issue, it's going really well, which is awesome. So here's a little bit of quote from our farm manager. Like he just said, we're pretty much said to the cows, produce more milk. We've increased production from around 400 kgs of milk solids per cow to over 500 kgs of milk solids per cow. And that's just, having more food, less stress, all the rest. So, been good. So our concepts gone through sort of stock management, repair and planting, pasture, effluent in terms of the standing pads, and the time of year. Once again, winter is when it mostly happens. And irrigation, we have done a few things around irrigation which can help minimise nitrogen leaching, but probably the other few things are way bigger, to be honest. So, yeah, I hate to say it, that is pretty much me. I sort of ran through it. So I hope that works. Is there any questions?
Not specifically, but I was going to say, you've talked about the environmental impacts. What are the impacts in terms of social and financial? You did briefly talk about some economic. Is there any other social impacts that students could talk about in this issue?
I think one of the key things will be is that the public perception is all focused around rivers, and the quality of those rivers may not necessarily improve straight away. And like I say, the reason is that it can take up to sort of 20 years for it to actually come through. So that's going to be really, really hard for farmers to sort of face up to. And a lot of people are thinking that the nitrogen is actually coming across the land, so runoff, versus actually coming through the soil profile into the water system. So there needs to be more education, especially more education around things like standing pads. People don't like cows in confined spaces. I think in terms of the other sort of social sides, because our cows are getting a lot more, we're looking more into like sort of things like 3 and 2 milking, which is more about looking after your workers. And the extra time of actually reducing your cow numbers, those running costs are going down. So there's less stress on your workers as well. Because there's less stress on the cows and they're not pushed as much. You can have some really positive animal welfare outcomes. So the cow's life does improve, or the quality of life does improve. I don't think many people would necessarily understand how you can reduce the number of cows while still maintaining reasonably high levels of output. And I think that could be something that maybe for farmers, if you're like, we want to reduce the number of cows, or maybe you should reduce the number of cows, that can be really, really hard if you have got a certain level of debt that you need to service. It comes in the financial pressures. So to reduce the number of cows is quite hard, I think, to actually get your head around.
And we have a question related to that. So the question is, what is the economic difference between having 650 versus 550 cows producing 500 kgs per milk solids?
Oh, that is a really good question. Probably the best way of answering that, would actually be going, so CITIC is the organisation that's got quite a few members. So they do farm reports. It would also depend in terms of your payout for that year, which kind of does make it a little bit harder. I hate to say it. So like this year would be great. Awesome. But next year, not so much. But I think if you think about it, not just in terms of this is your profit, I think you actually have to think about the whole system. So for example, because this year the payout is so high, technically speaking, you may push your cows a little bit further on in the season to get those extra milk solids, but that could be the detriment to their body condition, which could actually affect your empty rates, the coming year. So you can kind of get that a little bit extra out of them, but you have to be willing to kind of take the cost later down. So the good news is that with our cows having so much more food, yes, they're able to achieve higher production rates, but in actual fact, their condition is really, really good as well. So our reproductive rates are really good as well, and that's flowing through because we also use sex semen, and there's a few other things that we use on farm to help reduce it. So yeah, you can't just take, straight profit, because you can break your back for it and it's not sustainable long term.
So you mentioned irrigation in your last slide there on, did you want to just elaborate on what you meant by that? Like, was it a different type of irrigation, or was it just irrigation in general?
So essentially, it applies definitely in Canterbury, because of course Canterbury irrigates. We're quite dry. For us, there is natural leaching happening into that sort of aquifers as well. So if you think about, if we're taking water out while putting nitrates in, then if it's not in balance, what you could be doing is that it could be greater concentrations of nitrates over time, because there's just less water around. So that's one thing to sort of consider. The other thing that we actually use is this device called Cleartech. Oh, sorry, not Cleartech. Actually, 1 second. What I can do is I'll do this one. I'll actually just show you guys what this is because it's pretty awesome. It's called AgFlex. If it decides to come up. So going down. Sorry about this. Here we go. And we'll just present. So for us, we've got center pivots.
It's just presenting your same slide as we had before.
Oh, is it? Oh, maybe I have to, stop share.
Yeah.
There we go.
Awesome.
Okay, so is this one now showing?
No, just your face.
Oh, just my face. Oh, no, scary. Where are we? Here we go. We're going to go share slide, and we will do this one. Okay, how's that one going? Present.
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Computer's just thinking about life a little bit. There we go. So in terms of our irrigation, look, we've got our two main centre pivots, depending on the block, but we've got our centre pivots in there. And centre pivots are really cool because they can do variable rates. So you can actually cater it to your soils, things like ditches or those sort of more sensitive areas. But another really cool thing that we've got is actually a thing called AgFlex. So where's my AgFlex? Here we go. So essentially it's just a tape that kind of goes in and it sends an electrical signal. But what it does tell us is it tells us about soil moisture. And as it stands, look, we brought 4 of them. They cost $13,000. We've actually already saved $10,000 in terms of pumping costs in the first year, which is why 50% of farmers have them. But instead of just trying to judge it by eye, what you're actually understanding is the soil profile. So you're always keeping it topped up, essentially, to the optimum amount. But it's also really good because it means that you don't overwater. Because once again, if you've got that nitrogen or the nitrate sitting in the soil and you overwater, all it's going to do is just take them down through the soil profile past that root system. So a really, really good sort of piece of technology. Once again, it's kind of underground, but definitely worthwhile. And you can just set it up. So because we've got 4 different soil types, we do need 4 different AgFlex for each type of soil. But it's definitely worth it. So that's been really positive. And like I say, actually using center pivots, they are really efficient. And you can put in those variable rates and you can sort of change the speed. So that gives you more control over the system. The other side that has sort of come through is that a lot of the research that we've done has fed into Overseer. And I'm not sure if many people, hopefully, some people will be familiar, maybe not. But what you have to do is you have to model what you think your nitrogen leaching is going to be, and Overseer is the way to do that. So because of all our research of plantain and around plantain, it's been able to go into Overseer, and it is actually an option for farmers to use. Overseer can actually dictate kind of what you can do on the land. So one of my friends, she had a cut and carry piece of land. You know, there was no way they could put cows on it. Fast, it's just straight nitrogen leaching. It'll put them over their requirements. So that was the only option, is to pretty much go out there and cut and carry for stock. So yeah, big. And while that is what we're going to be depending on, I guess, going into the future, because lots of farms don't have lysimeters, and it is still a little bit of a guessing game to try to figure out how much it's actually going through.
We have a question based on that too, Lauren. So she's just wanting to refer back to what you talked about, historic nitrogen and groundwater and the aquifers. So she just wants to clarify whether this means that environmental consequence will carry on for the next 30 years. And she was referring it back to Lake Ellesmere.
Yeah.
My gut feeling is that the answer is going to be yes, but I'll let you answer.
Essentially, like, it is very much dependent on your soil type, but there is lag time. So what we've done, you know, this year, once again, it could take 20, 30 odd years to actually work its way through. So even if we are improving things like over the last 2 years, you may not see direct results straight away. And that can be really, really frustrating for everyone, because I think there'll be a lot of political pressure that if things are not seen to be improving, and people's estimations is that, they're willing to wait sort of 2 or 3 years and they're not improving, then there could actually become greater restrictions, or they're looking for more solutions. And the other problem is that often to actually improve it, it's not one solution. It's not just one thing that you have to do. It's multiple things that actually add up to help with this problem, especially because it's what we call like a non-point source. It's kind of quite wide across. If it's a point and we know it's polluting, then we look at that point and we go, oh yeah, we can solve it. But because this is a non-point source problem, you kind of have to look over a large amount of land and actually see what everyone's doing. And once again, you can't necessarily, even though you're doing the right thing, you can't necessarily guarantee that, the guy down the road is also doing it. At the end of the day, it will come through in the results. But 30 years' time, how relevant is that data? So, yeah, yes, we've got a problem. It's not going to be fixed easily or quickly, sadly. But we've got some solutions, which is real cool, And a lot of people are blaming cows. But in actual fact, it's not the cows. It's what we're feeding them. It's actually a human problem more so than a cow problem. So, yeah, don't blame the cows. It's what we're feeding them. That's the problem. Cows are good. So, yeah, any more questions?
No, I don't have any other currently. So you've used dairying as your prime example today. Is there any other contexts that you could just share with other students who may not have looked at dairying as their context?
Yeah, so dairying does tend to be the big one just because of the intensification and its impacts and that sort of relationship. But if you're going to a sort of like a different one, if you're looking for probably high nitrogen emitters, you're probably looking at intensive farming. So that would be things like essentially things like piggeries, or you've got a lot of animals in a very, very small. So I think even potentially chickens would be quite high. But you've kind of got a bit of an advantage because they're in such a sort of confined space. You can actually deal and manage the effluent in a very different way. So I suspect that, I'm not 100% sure, but things like composting, because there'll be wood shavings and that will be absorbing up, the urine and their feces, which are sources of nitrogen. So once again, you kind of come up against that public perception, though, of do we like animals in small spaces? And generally speaking, it's a really large no. And I think it's important to remember that actually what we like is not necessarily what an animal needs. And I think that was really highlighted to me when I actually saw this farm. I went out to a chicken farm and they had free range and there were hardly any chickens outside, these beautiful grassy pastures. There were a few cows and all the chickens were around the cows. And I asked them, why are the chickens around the cows? And he said, well, chickens are prey birds. So for them actually being out in the big grassy paddock is quite terrifying because hawks can actually come along, So it's not necessarily saying that, barn farming is the right way of doing things, but often we take it from a very human perspective about what we would like and don't actually consider what the animals would like. So, yeah, so those intensive systems, like there can be a few positives in the fact of you're containing the nitrogen and you can manage it a lot more. Probably the other thing that has come up is around effluent management. So I'll see if I can find a slide. Here we go. So for us, if you have a look, that's just pretty much some effluent, that you get from your shed wash down. Look, that can stay. It'll still be like that in 2 months' time, which is why we need really large effluent ponds. But if you've got your standing pads and you're doing a dairy wash down and things like that, you need a large amount of area for your effluent ponds. So what we've done is there's been a new sort of advance of technology where you can actually put in tanks, and what will happen is that the heavier material will actually finally settle down to the bottom, and then you're left with clear water at the top. And you can take that clear water and you can use it for ideally like not shed wash down, but yard wash down. So you can use it there, or you can apply it back onto your paddocks. But it does mean that in terms of your holding capacity of your effluent pond, it does increase significantly. And if these standing pads are going to become more and more common, then you're going to have to deal with the effluents as well. So really, really good. It also, of course, with our waterways, people are not liking E. coli and things getting in. It does actually decrease the amount of E. coli. I think it's by like 99.98%, so nearly 100%, which is real positive. This was it being installed, and literally it is just those 2 tanks.
Lauren, we can't see that. Are you presenting?
Oh,
sorry. So we're still on the irrigation slide. So you can.
I don't know why it's showing that one. How does that look?
No change at this stage, but
Your screen sharing.
Yep, it's up now. Yep.
Sorry, there is a lag. There is a lag.
It's all good now. We can see it.
Okay, I'll do present and I'll just do. Sorry, I'll just go that one. So yeah, so for us, it's just those 2 tanks over there, and it does reduce it quite a bit. But if you were to look at your effluent, it would stay in that, like that's been there for 2 months. And there is a lot of water in there. So what Cleartech does is that we put in an additive, it just separates out the sort of the heavier solids from the water. So we can use the top water percentage, like I say, on the paddocks. And that means that our capacity is increased, so we're not having to apply effluent. We can only apply effluent during the ideal times, which of course these days is a requirement. You can't just put effluent out whenever, or else you can increase nitrogen leaching. And also destroy your paddocks, which is not great for future food supply. So that has, how long has it been on the market? I think it's been on the market for maybe about 3 years. It's been making the rounds. Sadly, field days have not been happening as much, but Cleartech is definitely a really, really big one. The other one that has just been released, I think it's been like last week, by the same guys that actually developed Cleartech. Essentially, they're putting something else on your effluent ponds, and it stops greenhouse emissions, because effluent ponds apparently also produce greenhouse emissions, which I didn't know about, but these guys are totally onto it, which is really inspiring. They're very smart. Awesome. So any questions around that one?
No, not currently.
Awesome.
No, but that was a good overview on looking at effluent and capturing that, as well as going back to the irrigation. That was good to be able to provide just a little bit more detail on those management practices. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the really big thing sort of coming up in the future is just going to be the costs. It's going to be massive in terms of, putting in your standing pad costs a lot of money. Like putting in your Cleartech, regulation, and actually getting your head around regulation is what is required. It is getting more technical. So you do need people that know how the regulation works and what they're doing. Because if you were to focus on it, I think as a farmer, you'll quickly become a little bit like, not overwhelmed, but you'll be so focused on trying to get the regulation sorted, you might not necessarily find the same amount of time to actually manage the farm and do what you want to do. So that is putting a lot of stress on farmers. And yeah, it is going to be more in the future, I think is how it's looking with our recent one, Noah coming through. So yeah, you need to be reasonably good at reading and understanding what's required, But it is a problem, nitrogen leaching, and we do need to make sure that we're sorting it out. Can't avoid it.
Excellent. Okay. So any last things you want to suggest for anyone, or any top tips for the exam?
I think if you're wanting to cover this one in terms of solution, choose tool 3, points. And my top ones would definitely be your plant species, because once again, it's what we're feeding them that is causing the nitrogen. I'd definitely go sort of like your winter management, because that's when most nitrogen leaching is happening. So that's your standoff pads, that's your catch crops, that sort of side of things is definitely, but also the public perception around that. And then, yeah, I'd probably either talk about effluent or riparian plantings. Riparian plantings could be quite a good one, just because it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but that's what everyone thinks is going to solve the problem, you know. Which, considering the new rules, I think the original distance was supposed to be 5 meters, and that came down to 3 meters buffer for riparian planting. So, yeah, I think those would be the 3 that I would focus on, and just go in depth with those ones, and don't try to cover it all, because it can be a very, very full-on issue. So, yeah, and definitely know about eutrophication in the nitrogen cycle. Know the nitrogen cycle. It's important.
Excellent. Oh, well, thank you very much, Lauren, for your expertise in looking at that environmental issue. I'm sure there's lots of things, and particularly the management practices that the students can then write about for their exam, relating that back to the impacts on looking environmental, social and economic. So just a reminder, students, you need to back that up with some data. So some of the information that Lauren has presented today, you'll be able to go back and use to back up your viewpoint or your management practice that you are justifying. Okay, so I'd love big thanks, Lauren, for your time today. And yeah, it was very good presentation. So thanks very much.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening. Hopefully you found it interesting and a little bit inspiring. You know, it's not all doom and gloom. There's some real cool things happening in the future. And it's cool to be, you know, part of it. So yeah, good luck with your exams. You'll do amazing. And the CFC, it's going to be great.